Welcome to tonight's Town Hall. I'm Noelle Forde. On January 1st, Illinois is going to be the first state in the nation to completely eliminate cash bail. That's when the Pretrial Fairness Act takes effect, which is a larger part of a criminal justice package, the SAFETY Act. Now, the SAFETY Act is a comprehensive criminal justice package originally signed into law by Governor J.B. Pritzker back in 2021. The portion of the act that ends cash bail in Illinois is set to go into effect in January. The SAFETY Act and the elimination of cash bail became a major focus of the 2022 midterm elections. Republicans called for the law to be repealed, while multiple states' attorneys filed a lawsuit against the act, questioning whether it was constitutional. While the act was originally passed back in 2021, lawmakers came back to the table during veto session to make some changes and clarify certain items. Governor Pritzker signing an over 300-page trailer bill into law earlier this month. Now, it gives a judge more discretion on when someone can be detained, adds more crimes to the list of detainable offenses, but most notably, it lays out what's going to happen to people who are already in jail awaiting trial come January 1st. Illinois lawmakers closing out veto session on Thursday by pushing through changes to the Pretrial Fairness Act. The new amendment adds crimes like arson to charges that would allow for someone to be detained while awaiting trial.
This is a product of negotiations with such stakeholders who are neutral on this bill: the State's Attorneys Association, the advocates, law enforcement, and other criminal justice partners. And I would like to repeat that this bill has the support of victims' rights groups, and I'm grateful for it.
The legislation also lays out the transition between the current cash bail system and the new one going into effect, explaining that anyone who's charged with an offense on or after January 1st will have their pretrial release determined under the new system. Those arrested before January 1st will stay on the current bail system, but people arrested before January 1st can motion to have their case heard under the new rules. This will happen on a continuing basis. These hearings must be done within 7 to 90 days, depending on how serious the charge is. Illinois' court system is already preparing.
The task force has created a number of materials for all stakeholders. We will adjust those as necessary and hold as many town halls and trainings that we need to do between now and the effective date to make sure that people are as prepared as possible.
But the bill failed to get Republican support in the state. Outgoing Minority Leader Jim Durkin believes it's going to do more harm than good.
When this bill was passed a few years ago, I said it was misguided, confusing scheme that will diminish public safety in all regions and streets throughout Illinois, and I stand by that today.
The legislation also provides consistency for what prosecutors must present to detain somebody awaiting trial on the grounds that they're a threat, along with clarifying that judges have the ability to issue arrest warrants if somebody does not show up in court. And that trailer bill was passed December 1st, just 1 month before the Pretrial Fairness Act is set to take place. Champaign County State's Attorney Julia Reitz offered a neutral testimony on the Senate floor, saying they're training people on these new changes and what to expect.
We have worked very hard to get to a point where we believe that this is a process that we can put into place on January 1st.
She says that they're constantly working to make sure things go smoothly when the new year hits. And when the Pretrial Fairness Act goes into effect at the start of the new year, Illinois is going to be the first state in the nation to abolish cash bail. I spoke with political science expert Kent Redfield about that aspect and some of the changes that were made to it. So how significant is it for the state of Illinois to be the first state to eliminate cash bail?
Well, there are going to be a lot of other states that are going to look at, what did we do and how did it work out? So it's very significant. It's significant for Illinois politics because it shows how much that the Democratic Party has moved away from the center and more to the left in terms of, this is an idea that would not have been able to fly 10 years ago, 20 years ago, because the Democrats would have had a much bigger part of their base would have been downstate, and they would have had to make compromises because a lot of resistance to this has come from downstate counties, and so it is, it's indicative of what's happened to the state party, but it's very important nationally in terms of what other states learn from what we've done, because Illinois, although it's an outlier in terms of the Midwest, Illinois is more now in sync with California, New York, more east and west coast than we are Midwest.
And with the Safety Act, we've seen a lot of controversy and as well a lot of changes with it, with these new amendments passed. And a big issue that was brought up was just how it was passed originally. So can we just speak about how the first version of the Safety Act was passed?
Okay, so the act was passed at the end of the session 2 years ago in a posture about like we're now in terms of the legislature. It was done with only Democratic votes. It was a huge bill that was passed right at the end of session. And now, they clearly intended, they had a 2-year delayed effective date. They intended this to be something that, they would work on and change. And that happens with big pieces of legislation all the time. But the way they went about it, with basically doing it with Democratic votes without much in the way of, Republican input, is an indication of, the supermajorities that the legislature has on the Democratic side, and how easy it is to get in a posture where you just, ram things through. I mean, if you think about what's been going on in Florida with their supermajorities and the lack of input that the Democrats have in Florida, we're seeing the same sort of thing in Illinois, where you do things with huge majorities, and it tends to be a process where you really don't get as much feedback or as much time to really kind of consider and think about what you're doing. So I'm not sure it's the healthiest way to legislate, but it's certainly indicative of how states with big partisan majorities often conduct themselves.
Yeah, and this was brought up on the floor a lot when they were passing that trailer bill. A lot of Republicans were saying that this is the third trailer bill for the Safety Act, and it should have been right the first time. But Democrats said since it's such a major piece of legislation, it's very common for them to pass one version of the bill, come back, amend it. So what is your take on that, seeing all these happen?
Okay, well, if you put it in place, then everybody is working against, your mark, what you put out there, and you're able to establish, the broad outlines. This is what we want to accomplish. Now let's work on the fine print. And so, I think the last 2 years indicate that it probably would have been better to get more input to try and work out some of these things ahead of time, rather than just relying on, well, we can come back and work it out. And so whether that there are better ways to do what we did, but done is done in terms of where we are now. But I hope we're going to learn some lessons that maybe, there are things that were worked out that everybody agreed, these are problems we should have fixed. Things like, uncertainty about trespassing and arrests and stuff, would have been better to work those out ahead of time, anticipate them, rather than run it through a very partisan political campaign with a lot of misinformation that kind of poisons the well in terms of getting resolution and stuff. There's no best way to do this, but it is an indication that it's often a good thing to get feedback and to talk and take into account what other stakeholders have to say about what you're trying to do.
And do you see lawmakers, even in the future after January 1st, going back and having to make even more possible changes?
Oh, I think that's entirely possible, because this is we're changing, hundreds of years of not only Illinois history, but the way that we've run the judicial process in the United States. And so the idea of cash bail has been part of the culture and the process. And so this takes a lot of rethinking and changing of mindsets. Even if you agree with the principle, which is that we should be protecting the rights of the accused, and we shouldn't have a system that's biased against people because of, whether or not they're poor, you're still talking about changing the way judges think about bail, changing the way prosecutors think about jail, and or more correctly, pretrial confinement, which is what it really is that we're talking about.
And we'll hear more from Kent later. Now, the Safety Act affects many different agencies in the state, including law enforcement. Our Julia Rosier spoke with one local sheriff about the impact on his department.
I spoke with Christian County Sheriff Bruce Kettlecamp. He told me his reactions to the changes made in the Safety Act. He says he's pleased with it, but he still has some concerns. Kettlecamp says one of his concerns with the Safety Act was the trespassing bill. He tells us community members have approached him with their own worries about the provision. According to Kettlecamp, officers will be required to issue a citation for trespassing unless the officer reasonably believes the person poses a threat or has an obvious mental or medical health issue and poses a danger to others or themselves. If an officer issues a citation and the trespassing continues, the person can then be arrested.
I was afraid, a lot of people we're going to try to take the laws in their hands, or there's going to be more problems associated with that.
Kettlecamp says another concern for Christian County is training. The Safety Act sets out new training standards for law enforcement. He says Christian County already participates in a lot of training, and although training is important, it often results in having to pay overtime, which places a financial burden on the department and taking deputies off the streets.
It bothers me that the legislators make these laws and they have no clue what goes out on the streets, what goes on the streets. They make these laws that we have to enforce, but they don't get out on the streets and actually do the enforcing.
Kettlecamp says time will tell on how effective the Safety Act will really be for law enforcement. Reporting at the Capitol, I'm Julia Rosier. Back to you.
Thank you for that, Julie. And the elimination of cash bail is also going to impact Illinois' court system in many ways once it takes effect. In fact, some counties are worried about how their courts will operate and be paid for. Our David Pierce reports.
Bail money. Experts believe this resource keeping the court system moving may soon be a thing of the past.
Once they post that $100, basically that's their guarantee that, hey, I'm going to come to court.
That's Circuit Clerk Melissa Quick for Vermilion County. She's concerned her staff will be working more cases with the law causing people to write some offenders a ticket to appear in court rather than take them to jail and pay a bond to be released. This is due to low-level crimes like possession of a controlled substance and retail theft slated to be non-detainable offenses starting New Year's Day.
So they're going to be making the contact with these people on the streets. They're going to be giving them a notice to appear. So we're going to increase our caseload.
Quick says this may be a continuing cycle going forward. Last month, the Vermilion County Board passed the budget for the upcoming fiscal year of almost $47 million, with bail money collected taken into account. The budget covers services like the Vermilion County Health Department, transportation services, human resources, and local elections. Now, Vermilion County Chairman Larry Bond is not sure how long this money will last into next year.
To the third and fourth quarter of 23 before we can even average out what the impact will be, and it could even be beyond that. It may be first quarter of 24.
Bond and fellow board members plan the budgets each fiscal year, and he says the money gathered before the law is effective will still fund the court system in the meantime.
The residuals will still be out there of anything that happened before 12/31 of this year. So we'll still see as those cases are coming through the courts, we're told that we'll still collect on those.
But when it runs out, Bond believes the county will need to make cuts to other departments in order to fund the court system.
That's the fear of the unknown for us right now, because we'll have to just take a hard look at perhaps other services and other offices throughout the county to see where we can shave the bottom line there to help offset that there and the courthouse.
The removal of cash bail is intended to make the state's criminal justice system more equitable. Many say race plays a part in who gets released under the state's current bail system.
That's right. I spoke with one state attorney, and he says it's unfair this justice system is based on money, given America has a history of discrimination towards minorities. I also spoke with one professor, and he believes Black Americans risk their freedom in order to provide for their family, but end up in jail.
My grandfather fought in World War II and then is white and bought a house in Chicago, right? Not everybody could buy a house in 1947.
Eric Reinhardt is the state attorney for Lake County. He says many white Americans share the same luxury along with better job opportunities, which make for resources to get them out of jail if arrested.
People are able to put up their houses for bail, right? People are able to access 401ks for bail currently.
According to a 2019 study by the U.S. Department of Justice, 89% of Illinois inmates were males, 33% of which were white, while 50% were black. James Kilgore is the Director of Advocacy and Outreach for First Followers in Champaign County, an organization that helps former inmates get readjusted to society. He says the large number of black people behind bars is a result of them not having the same resources as their white counterparts.
So there's this disproportionate incarceration of black people, which is also connected to the fact that black people are disproportionately in low income sectors and therefore are also unable to make cash bond.
Dr. Jalil Abdul Adel is the co-director of Urban Youth Trauma Center at the University of Illinois at Chicago. He says the nation's history of oppression through employment and housing has led some black Americans to criminal activity in order to survive, but eventually get arrested.
There is no job discrimination when it comes to dealing drugs, harming sometimes your own community in desperation through armed robberies and other things.
Dr. Jalil says black Americans going to jail once impacts their professional opportunities going forward, putting them right back where they started.
Unfortunately, if you get convicted of crimes, particularly felonies, that further denies you income opportunities, residential locations, and then the system and the cycle just gets worse and worse and worse.
Dr. Jalil also told me black Americans not having the ability to pay their bond also means they can't afford a lawyer they feel is suitable to argue their case, which can lead to them being sentenced to prison. In studio reporting, I'm David Pierce. Back to you.
Thank you for that, David. While the state is set to eliminate cash bail in the new year, there is a pending court case over the SAFE-T Act. The case filed by about 60 states' attorneys was consolidated into one case out of Kankakee County. Let's hear more from Kent Redfield.
And then moving on to the lawsuit pending now against the SAFE-T Act. So it's filed by about 60 states' attorneys, and that court case is going to be on December 20th in Kankakee County. So what are the possible implications of it?
Well, the lawsuit turns on the meaning of the section of the state constitution that deals with bail and habeas corpus. And so it is a question about whether or not in abolishing cash bail, you are somehow running afoul of the intent of that section of the state constitution. And if you read the language, it's talking about, you can't, essentially you're trying to protect people who've been arrested, who before trial, that you can't just keep them in trial indefinitely. And so it talks about situations in which you can have bail or you can't have bail. And there's provisions in there for, not only what the prosecutors do, but for the judges to take into account the safety of the public. And so you're going to have to convince the court that the specifics about whether or not bail means that you keep people in jail or don't keep them in jail by having them pay money, whether that's the true principle that we're dealing with, or if it's really the principle that we're dealing with is how do you give the right of people who have been arrested but not tried, how can you protect their rights so that don't just languish in jail waiting for trial.
And that case is going to be heard at the Illinois Supreme Court out of Kankakee on December 20th. The judge is expected to have a ruling the week after that. And we'll continue to follow this court case and the elimination of cash bail here in Illinois. You can follow us on Facebook or Twitter or head over to newschannel20.com. Have a great night and a great weekend, everyone.